Have you ever looked out your window late at night and noticed a car parked across the street that wasn't there before?
It's still
A
there.
car with no license plates, sitting dead
What is
silent
the
under the flickering glow of a street lamp? You tell yourself it is nothing, just a neighbor having a late guest. But then you see the silhouette inside, sitting perfectly still, watching your house. Tonight, I am going to tell you how easy it is to simply cease to exist, how the people we trust to protect us can make you vanish into thin air, leaving no trace, no record, and no one to remember you. Right after this, you will understand why I sleep with my shoes on, and why I never, ever answer an unexpected knock at the door. It started exactly 3 months ago. I was working as a mid-level archivist for a federal records facility in Virginia. It was a boring job. Dusty boxes, endless spreadsheets, the humming of fluorescent lights that gave me a constant headache. My life was painfully ordinary. I had a small apartment, a cat named Toby, and a habit of staying up late listening to the rain against my window. But one Tuesday evening, everything changed. I was tasked with digitizing a batch of old redacted files from the 1980s. Most of it was mundane bureaucratic nonsense. But at the bottom of the last box, there was a manila folder with no barcode, no official seal, just a single name written in black marker, Project Seraph. I should have put it back. I should have reported the anomaly to my supervisor. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I opened it. Inside were photographs, not documents,
Look at
just
this one.
photographs. Polaroids of
It can't
ordinary
be
people.
real.
A woman at a grocery store, a man walking a dog, a teenager sitting on a park bench. But in every single picture, standing in the deep background, barely visible in the shadows, was the exact same tall, featureless figure wearing a dark suit. And pinned to the last photograph was a handwritten note. It read, "They are the cleaners, and once they look at you, you are already gone." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I quickly shoved the folder back into the box and tried to focus on my work. But the silence in the archives suddenly felt suffocating. I could hear my own heart pounding against my ribs, heavy and fast. I packed up my things and left early. The drive home was a blur of paranoid glances in my rearview mirror. The sky broke open, pouring heavy rain down on the asphalt, blurring the headlights behind me. That was the first time I noticed it. A black sedan, keeping a perfect distance. When I turned left, it turned left. When I sped up, it matched my pace. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I held my breath, turning into my apartment complex. The sedan drove past. I let out a shaky breath, convincing myself I was just letting a creepy photograph mess with my head. I walked up to my second-floor apartment, the wooden stairs creaking under my wet shoes. I fumbled with my keys, the metal clicking loudly in the quiet hallway. I stepped inside and locked the deadbolt. Safe, or so I thought. That night, the nightmare began. I was lying in bed, listening to the rain lashing against the glass. The apartment was pitch black, save for the weak amber light from the street lamp outside filtering through the blinds. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it. A sound so subtle, I almost missed it. A faint metallic scratch at my front door, like a key slowly, deliberately scraping against the lock. I froze. The blood drained from my face. I stopped breathing, straining my ears to listen. The scratching stopped. Then, a heavy, muffled footstep right outside my door. Someone was standing there, just standing and listening. I was paralyzed by a fear so deep it felt like ice in my veins. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but my throat was completely dry. I lay there in the dark, my eyes wide, staring at the bedroom doorway. Minutes stretched into eternity. And then, my cell phone on the nightstand lit up. The screen glowed brightly in the dark room. Unknown caller. It didn't ring. It just vibrated. a low, angry buzz against the wood. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked it up. I pressed answer, bringing the phone to my ear. I didn't say a word. For a long moment, there was nothing but dead air. And then, a voice. A voice that sounded entirely artificial, monotone, and completely devoid of human emotion, whispered through the speaker. "We know you looked." The line went dead. Panic exploded in my chest. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from my drawer, my hands shaking violently. I crept toward the living room, keeping my back against the wall, merging with the shadows. I peered through the peephole of my front door. The hallway was empty, but when I looked down, my blood ran cold. There, seeping beneath the gap of the door, was a tiny puddle of rainwater and dark mud. Someone had been inside my apartment. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't heard them walk in, but they had been standing right inside my home while I was in bed. I backed away, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I checked the windows, all locked. I checked the closets, empty, but the suffocating feeling of being watched never left me. I grabbed a chair and jammed it under the doorknob. I sat in the corner of my living room, clutching the flashlight, staring at the front door until the sun finally came up. I thought going to the police would help. That was my first and biggest mistake. The morning light offered no comfort, only a harsh reality. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a thick, gray fog that swallowed the neighborhood. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I just grabbed my keys and ran to my car. I drove straight to the local precinct, constantly checking my mirrors. Every dark car on the road made my heart skip a beat. I burst into the station, practically shivering, and demanded to speak to a detective.
I saw it.
I sat in a brightly lit room, telling a weary-looking officer everything. The folder, the black car, the scratching at the door,
Look,
the
we
phone
both
call,
know you were there.
the muddy
Save
footprints.
us the trouble.
He listened, his pen tapping lazily against his notepad. When I finished, he gave me a look of pity mixed with annoyance. He told me it sounded like an overactive imagination, that maybe the building janitor had stepped inside by mistake, that unknown callers are usually just telemarketers. He refused to send a patrol car. He told me to go home and get some sleep. I left the station feeling completely defeated and utterly alone. I walked out to the parking lot, the cold morning air biting at my face. As I approached my car, I noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper, a plain white envelope. I ripped it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single, high-resolution photograph.
I told you
It was
he
a
was
picture
right
of
behind
me,
He had the
sitting
knife.
inside the police station
why are you
just
looking at me
5
like
minutes
that?
ago, talking to the detective, taken from a high angle, through a security camera. On the back, in that same black marker from the archive folder, were 3 words: "No one cares." My stomach dropped. The system wasn't going to protect me. The system was the one hunting me. I got into my car and locked the doors, feeling like a trapped animal. I realized then that I couldn't go back to my apartment. They knew where I lived. They had a key. They had access to police feeds. I was dealing with a ghost, a massive, invisible entity that could manipulate reality itself. I decided to drive to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, paying in cash. I needed a place to hide, a place to think. The motel room was dingy, smelling of old smoke and cheap bleach. I locked the door, pulled the heavy blackout curtains shut, and sat on the edge of the sagging bed. The silence in the room was deafening. I took out my phone,
pick up the phone.
intending to call my sister,
I don't have much time.
to
They're
tell
outside.
someone, anyone,
Send help now,
what
please,
was
hurry.
happening. But when I looked at the screen, there was no signal, just a symbol indicating searching for service. I walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just a fraction of an inch to peek outside. The parking lot was mostly empty, but there, parked under a broken neon sign, was a black sedan. I dropped the curtain. My legs gave out entirely, and I collapsed onto the dirty, stained carpet. They had followed me. They had been watching me the entire time. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to cover my mouth to stop from throwing up. The room suddenly felt incredibly small, shrinking around me like a wooden coffin. I crawled backward away from the window, my back hitting the edge of the mattress. I needed a weapon. I frantically searched the room, my hands shaking violently. A heavy glass ashtray, a cheap floor lamp, nothing that could stop whatever was out there. Then, I heard it. The heavy, unmistakable sound of a car door slamming shut. It echoed through the quiet parking lot like a gunshot. My breath caught in my throat. I lay completely still on the floor, listening. The rain had started again, a steady, rhythmic drumming against the roof. But beneath it, I could hear footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Boots splashing in the puddles on the concrete walkway. They were moving toward my room number 12. The footsteps stopped right outside my thin wooden door. The silence that followed was far more terrifying than the noise. I stared at the brass doorknob. The dim light from outside cast long, distorted shadows under the door frame. I saw the shadow of 2 feet, standing perfectly still, waiting. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My heart hammered so violently against my ribs, I thought it would burst through my chest. Then, the doorknob slowly began to turn. A metallic click. The lock groaned. They had a key, or something that acted like one. Blind panic took over.
Please, no.
I scrambled off the floor and threw myself into the tiny, cramped bathroom, shutting the flimsy door behind me. There was a small, frosted window high up on the wall, just above the moldy shower. It was my only way out. I climbed onto the wet porcelain edge of the bathtub, my wet shoes slipping, tearing at the rusty window latch. It was stuck. From the main room, I heard the heavy thud of the front door swinging open, hitting the wall.
No.
They were inside. I sobbed silently, pushing against the window frame with all my remaining strength. The metal shrieked and the window finally gave way, popping open to the cold night air. I hoisted myself up, ignoring the sharp pain as the metal frame scraped against my stomach. I squeezed my shoulders through the narrow opening and tumbled out head first into the muddy alleyway behind the motel. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of my lungs. I lay in the cold mud for a second, gasping for air. Above me, I heard a heavy thud against the bathroom door inside. They knew I was escaping.
Oh God, no.
I scrambled to my feet and ran.
Get away from me!
I didn't look back. I sprinted away from the motel, plunging into the thick, overgrown woods that bordered the property. The darkness was absolute, thick, suffocating, and pitch black. Rainwater whipped against my face, blinding me. Wet branches tore at my clothes and scratched my skin, but I couldn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. The sound of my own ragged breathing was deafening. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sounded like a heavy boot right behind me. I tripped over an exposed root and slammed face first into the wet earth. Mud filled my mouth. I stayed down, too exhausted to move, burying my face in the wet dirt. I held my breath, listening to the dark forest. Nothing, just the rain. I slowly dragged myself into the hollowed-out roots of a massive, dead oak tree, curling into a tight ball. I was freezing, soaking wet, paralyzed by a fear so profound it felt like I was losing my mind. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block out the terrifying silence. I stayed in that hole for hours, the cold seeping deep into my bones. When the first gray light of dawn finally began to filter through the trees, I forced myself to move. I was shivering uncontrollably, my clothes clinging heavily to my skin. I needed shelter. I needed a phone that wasn't tracked. I trudged through the wet brush for what felt like miles, keeping off any main paths. Finally, the trees began to thin out. Through the morning fog, I saw the rusted canopy of an abandoned gas station. It sat on the edge of a lonely, empty dirt road. The windows were boarded up, and weeds grew through the cracked concrete. It looked desolate, but to me, it looked like a fortress. I limped toward it, checking my surroundings every few seconds. I slipped around to the back of the building, finding a rusted metal door that was slightly ajar. I squeezed inside, the hinges whining loudly. The interior was a graveyard of dusty shelves and broken glass. The smell of old oil and decay was overpowering. I moved quietly through the gloom, heading toward what looked like an old manager's office. Inside, resting on a cluttered desk covered in dust, was a heavy, gray landline phone. I rushed toward it, my hands trembling as I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. I prayed for a dial tone. Nothing. Absolute dead silence. The wires had probably been cut years ago. A wave of pure despair crashed over me. I dropped the phone, sinking into the moldy office chair. I was completely cut off from the world. No one knew where I was. No one was coming to help me. I buried my face in my muddy hands, finally letting the tears fall. I sat there in the dim, dusty room, completely broken. But then, the nightmare escalated. A sound broke through the quiet dust of the gas station. A sound that made the blood freeze solid in my veins. Outside, on the cracked concrete, the unmistakable crunch of heavy boots on broken glass. Someone was walking around the building. Slow, methodical, searching. I stopped breathing. I slid off the chair and crawled under the heavy wooden desk, pressing my back flat against the wall. I pulled my knees to my chest, making myself as small as possible. The dusty space under the desk offered a tiny, narrow view of the office doorway. Through the grime-covered window of the office, a beam of harsh white light suddenly pierced the darkness. A heavy flashlight. It swept across the dusty floor, casting long, terrifying shadows against the walls. The light moved slowly, deliberately, illuminating the broken shelves and the debris. Then, the beam of light stopped. It rested right on the doorway of the office. A massive, dark silhouette stepped into the frame. The figure was impossibly tall, wearing a long, heavy coat that seemed to absorb the light around it. They wore no mask, but their face was completely obscured by the deep, heavy shadows of the room. They stood perfectly still, looking around the small office. And then, the figure slowly turned its head, looking directly at the desk I was hiding under. I clamped both hands over my mouth, biting down on my own fingers to stop myself from screaming. The beam of the heavy flashlight moved inches away from my face.
It's moving.
I could see the thick dust motes dancing violently in the harsh white glare, swirling like tiny, panicked insects trapped in a jar. I closed my eyes, preparing for the inevitable. The heavy boots stepped closer, the sharp crunch of shattered glass echoing off the peeling wallpaper. The old, rotted wooden floorboards of the abandoned office groaned agonizingly under the massive weight of the intruder. I could hear the slow, rhythmic breathing of the man standing just on the other side of the thin wooden desk. It was a raspy, wet, mechanical sound, like someone breathing heavily through a thick leather mask or a respirator. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut, biting down on my own trembling knuckles to stifle the whimper building in the back of my dry throat. My heart was hammering against my ribs so violently I was certain the man towering above me could hear it. I was entirely paralyzed by a primitive, freezing fear, completely at the mercy of the dark, imposing silhouette. Time seemed to stretch and distort. Every single second felt like a grueling hour trapped inside a suffocating, inescapable nightmare. The beam of light slowly swept across the filthy floor, inching closer and closer to my hiding spot, until it finally caught the edge of my wet, muddy shoe protruding just past the desk leg. The harsh light hovered there, blindingly bright in the gloom. My lungs burned for oxygen, but I refused to take a breath. I was drowning in the stale, dusty air of the tiny space, waiting for a massive gloved hand to reach down and grab my ankle. I waited to be dragged out, screaming into the cold, empty night. I waited to be thrown into the trunk of that black sedan, destined to become just another redacted, forgotten file in a dusty cardboard archive box. But the hand never came. Instead, a sharp, piercing sound suddenly shattered the terrifying silence of the room. It was a rhythmic, electronic chirp coming from deep within the dark figure's heavy coat. A two-way radio. The flashlight beam instantly snapped away from my foot, sweeping upward to illuminate the cracked, water-stained wall opposite the desk. The figure reached into a deep pocket, the rustle of the thick, waterproof fabric sounding unnaturally loud, like rough sandpaper grating in the quiet room. I heard the sharp click of a transmission button, and then that exact same artificial, monotone voice from the anonymous phone call echoed through the empty gas station.
Warning.
Target acquired at secondary location.
Ordered to return to
Sector
base
4
immediately.
is compromised.
Repeat.
Relocate
return to base.
immediately. Return to base. The figure did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. Without uttering a single word of confirmation, the massive silhouette turned around. The heavy, muddy boots crunched against the broken glass once more, moving purposefully back toward the dark hallway. The harsh, white light of the flashlight swept away, plunging the small, suffocating office back into deep, impenetrable darkness. I lay perfectly still, my chest aching, listening intensely as the heavy footsteps grew fainter, echoing down the narrow corridor toward the rusted back door. I heard the heavy metal squeal agonizingly on its rusted hinges, followed by the violent, dull thud of it slamming aggressively shut. A long, agonizing minute later, the low, powerful, vibrating rumble of a heavy car engine roared to life, echoing through the thick morning fog outside. The tires spun aggressively on the wet asphalt, tearing away into the lonely night. The mechanical roar slowly fading into the distance, until there was absolutely nothing left but the steady, miserable, relentless drumming of the cold rain against the ruined, sagging roof. I did not move a single muscle. I stayed curled tightly into a ball under that rotting desk, frozen in a state of pure terror, my blood running cold and my entire body trembling uncontrollably for what felt like an absolute eternity. I was terrified it was a psychological trick. I was completely paranoid that they were simply standing perfectly still just outside the broken, grimy window, waiting patiently for me to show myself, waiting for me to make a mistake. The eerie silence was utterly deafening, pressing heavily in on me from every dark, cobwebbed corner of the abandoned gas station. I remained trapped in that cramped, dusty space for hours, listening to the rain slowly taper off. When the first weak, gray light of a bleak dawn finally began to filter through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, mournful shadows across the dusty office, I finally found the courage to drag myself out from under the heavy wood. My stiff joints screamed in agonizing pain. My clothes were completely soaked, heavy, and caked in dried mud and my own dried blood from the frantic escape through the thorny woods. As I stood up on shaking legs, my eyes adjusted to the dim morning light, and I looked down at the floor. Staring back at me, stamped clearly in the thick layer of dust just inches from where my head had been, was a massive, wet, perfectly defined footprint left behind by the intruder's heavy boot. It was impossibly large, a terrifying physical reminder of how incredibly close I had come to simply ceasing to exist. But that wasn't the most horrifying part. As I stumbled toward the door to leave, my foot kicked an old rusted metal bucket overturned in the corner of the room. Beneath it lay a terrifying discovery. There, scratched deeply and frantically into the rotting baseboard of the wall, were dozens of tally marks. Frantic, jagged lines gouged into the wood by someone's fingernails. And next to them, smeared in what looked like very old, dark, dried blood, was a single word: Seraph. This abandoned gas station wasn't just a random place to hide. It was one of their holding sites, a place where the people in those Polaroid photographs were brought before they vanished forever. I had unknowingly stumbled directly into the belly of the beast. Panic, fresh and blinding, surged through my veins. I burst out of the back door, running wildly into the cold, foggy morning. I didn't go back to my car, knowing it was undoubtedly bugged or disabled. I didn't go back to my apartment, or my safe, boring job, or my old, comfortable life. I walked for agonizing hours along the edge of the empty, muddy dirt road, keeping my head down, hiding in the deep brush whenever a vehicle approached in the distance. Eventually, my blistered, bleeding feet carried me to a small, forgotten, neon-lit truck stop sitting squarely on the edge of the county line. I used the emergency cash I had hidden inside my left shoe to bribe a tired, red-eyed trucker heading far west. I sat in absolute silence in the vibrating passenger seat for 2 straight days, staring blankly out the smeared window at the passing trees, jumping violently at every dark shadow that crossed our path. When we finally reached a sprawling, chaotic, unnamed city I had never been to, I stepped out into the rain. I immediately walked to a deep, fast-flowing river bordering the industrial district and threw my cell phone directly into the dark, churning water, watching it sink like a stone into the murky depths, permanently severing my final, fragile tie to the world I once knew. It has been exactly 3 months since that terrifying, rainy Tuesday night. I now live in a cramped, dark, miserable apartment on the wrong side of the tracks, under a fake name that isn't mine. I work grueling graveyard shifts in a massive, noisy shipping warehouse, manually moving heavy boxes, never speaking a single word to my coworkers, always keeping my head down and my face hidden under a dark cap. I spent my first paycheck buying 3 heavy-duty deadbolts and a steel chain for my front door. I permanently nailed all of my windows shut, covering the glass with thick black paint. I sleep restlessly with a heavy, razor-sharp kitchen knife hidden directly under my pillow, and I keep my heavy boots on my feet at all times, always ready to run at a moment's notice. I have essentially become a living ghost. I completely erased myself from society before the cleaners could do it for me. I truly thought I had finally escaped the endless nightmare. I honestly believed I had successfully slipped through the cracks of the massive system, disappearing safely into the chaotic, anonymous noise of the crowded, dirty city. But yesterday evening, that fragile illusion of safety was violently shattered. I was walking home from the warehouse after a grueling 14-hour shift, taking the long, confusing route through a narrow, dimly lit alleyway behind a row of abandoned storefronts. The night air was freezing cold, and a light, chilling mist had begun to fall, coating the crumbling brick walls in a shiny, damp layer of moisture. Suddenly, I felt that deeply familiar, sickeningly cold sensation crawling slowly up my spine. The undeniable, primal, terrifying feeling of being intensely watched by a predator in the dark. I stopped dead in my tracks right under a flickering, dying street lamp and looked frantically back over my shoulder into the gloom. The long alleyway appeared completely empty, just deep, imposing shadows, overflowing trash cans, and the distant hum of traffic. But when I turned my head back around to face forward, my blood instantly turned to solid ice. There, sitting perfectly still on top of an old wooden crate directly in the dead center of my path, illuminated slightly by the sickly yellow light, was a brand new, pristine manila folder. It hadn't been there a second ago. I approached it with trembling, hesitant steps, my breathing turning shallow and fast. No barcode, no official government seal, just a single name written in fresh, thick, dark black marker ink. My new, fake name. I stood frozen in the chilling, damp mist, staring down at the cursed folder, the horrifying realization hitting me with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. They had never lost me. They had simply let me run. They had stood back and watched me panic, watched me completely abandon my entire life, watched me hide in the dark and the dirt like a pathetic, frightened animal. They wanted me to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that no matter how incredibly far I travel, no matter what fake identity I assume, or how many heavy steel locks I install on my front door, I am never, ever truly alone. The cleaners are always there, standing quietly in the blind spots of my life, always watching. I didn't dare open the folder to see what new horrors lay inside. I simply stepped around it, my heart pounding a terrifying, erratic rhythm against my ribs, and ran blindly back to my fortified, pathetic apartment. And now, I sit here in the absolute center of my dark, freezing living room, illuminated only by the weak, static glow of the muted television screen. Clutching a knife in my sweaty hands, just waiting in agonizing suspense for the inevitable, metallic scratch at my door.
Listen to
if
me.
you are listening to my
Whatever you
voice
do,
right now,
do not look away from
please
this camera. They are
pay
using
very,
the television
very
to find
close
us.
attention to the world immediately around you. If you happen to look out your window and see a dark sedan parked silently on your street that doesn't belong there, if you ever hear a faint metallic clicking sound scratching at your front lock in the dead, quiet hours of the night, do not investigate. Do not go to the police. Do not turn on your lights. And whatever you do, if you see a tall silhouette standing outside your home, do not look them directly in the eye. They are always waiting out there, hiding in the deep, heavy shadows, just out of plain sight. Have you ever felt the chilling sensation of someone watching you intently from the pitch-black corner of your bedroom? Tell me about your terrifying experiences in the comments below. If you want to survive the long night ahead, you need to hit that subscribe button right now and join the Lost Horror channel. Your support is the only thing that helps me stay awake. And trust me, you absolutely will not want to miss the chilling, classified footage I have uncovered for next week's terrifying video. Lock your doors, check under your bed, and always sleep with one eye